Oh, what's going on, folks? I decided to show my face this time again. It's been a while, so I guess I'll do it. I'm going to see how far I can get. I was going to try to be crazy and be like, you know what, let's finish this whole book, but let's see how it goes. Anyway, for those that wanted to know, this is the book right here. There we go. I'll hold it up a little bit there. There we go. Memoirs of Ernst Rohm. And basically, we've been reading through this and kind of getting an idea, hearing me stammer and blah, blah, blah my way through this, and occasionally sounding good, but but basically that's what that is the name of the book. So now I show you in part 12. But all right. So I'm just gonna let y'all know here, and we're just gonna keep it moving. That's all we're gonna do. We are gonna keep it moving right now. There we go. Okay. Okay. So we left off. Let's see here. The brigade was never a welcome addition from the outset. And even such an experienced man as Colonel Schrodenbach could not deny this general impression. In any case, the conduct of that brigade was not good during the truce either. They took part in independent surrender negotiations with the Reichswehr, allowed themselves to be disarmed at their post before receiving the order, and had to be reminded of their duty at pistol point. It may therefore be justly suspected that the lone shooter came from their ranks, as the pioneers alleged. This received the Reichswehr of a large burden, if it does not excuse it. No responsibility rests with the RKF or the commanders of the district command occupation. The rounds fired at the pioneers provoked the response by the infantry. The 2nd Battalion, 19th Infantry Regiment entered the district command building in breach of the agreed truce terms. The officer responsible was Lieutenant Braun, who had once been an RKF member and had my trust. Now he and his comrades had our enmity. In view of the general armistice, the behavior of his men was reprehensible, even if the initial fire was independent and not ordered. I grant the unfortunate machine gunner reacted in the heat of the moment, and in all probability was not aiming at anybody in particular, but merely intended to spray the lower part of the building wall he was facing. Presumably, a ricochet hit Faust, who was in cover, while Lieutenant Casello was struck down by one of the last rounds of the burst from left to right, as he left the gate in the right corner of the wall. These were the conclusions of the investigation. Immediately after Captain Wimmer, Lieutenant Colonel Hoffmann visited again, bringing news from General Ludendorff, which gave me freedom of action. General von Epp urged me to accept the conditions, and after a brief inner reflection, I summoned my commanders and explained to them the situation and conditions. I listened to their opinions, which amounted to not giving away, but continuing the desperate struggle. I knew that these brave men had expected this answer. I felt intense pride that such men should recognize me as their leader. Then I issued the order to withdraw from the occupation and parade in the War Ministry courtyard. It was obeyed with protest. Because of the death of Faust, the RKF roll was called. I went up to each man and shook his hand. I shall never forget the emotional moment of this leave-taking. Deeply moved, the Reichswehr commander, Colonel von Flügel, attended the surrender, whilst Lieutenant Braun and his rabble disgraced the solemnity of the moment. Lieutenant Bergen of the State Police was reserved and tactful in taking possession of the RKF weapons. A final salute for the dead. And then Lieutenant Colonel Hoffmann accompanied me to Captain Wimmer's waiting car. Sorry, I had the dryer going. We're just going to keep it moving. Lieutenant Oswald called for 3 Heils, which thundered like a cry for revenge across the street. A Reichswehr officer cast off his sword and hurled it aside, no longer master of his emotions. Captain Seidel and Graf du Moulin remained by my side in the car which brought me as a prisoner via the Prince Arnulf barracks to police headquarters. My world had collapsed. At the same time as the exchange of fire at the War Ministry claimed 2 lives, General Ludendorff, Adolf Hitler, Justice Commissioner von der Pfordten, Lieutenant Colonel Kriebel, Captain Gilling, Lieutenant Bruckner, Graffa, Feder, Schleicher, and other leaders were marching at the head of an enthusiastic cheering force from Maximilianstrasse to the Odeonsplatz, singing Deutschland über alles and carrying the black, white, red, and swastika flags. General Ludendorff was accompanied by his loyal valet, Neubauer. At Hitler's side was his unshakable companion, Graf. At the Feldherrnhalle, the state police fired into their ranks, and loyal Germans lay writhing in their own blood. Many sought cover, threw themselves to the ground, or opened fire. The name of Police Lieutenant Freiherr von Gordon will always be notorious in connection with this bloodbath. The victor of Liège and Tannenberg continued marching erect, no bluster or hastening the pace. Through the ranks towards the rifle fire at his side, an officer who had given 4.5 years of unbroken frontline service, Major Streck. Hitler was wounded and taken off by friends in their car. President Ponner and his escort, Major Hühnlein, had been arrested by Colonel Bonzer after going to the police HQ. State Police Lieutenant von Prosch, who did his utmost for them, who was also arrested. On the evening of 8 November, Bonzer had cheered as heartily as the rest of the Volkisch for the Volkisch uprising. At the Bergenbrau Keller, he had embraced the National Socialists. Now he held their leaders captive. General Achter, who had been detained as Pioneer Barracks, other officers who had wanted to act as intermediaries at the infantry barracks between the Bergenbrau Keller and the Giesinger Bridge, Kampfbund and state police were facing each other. Captain Osterleicher had stationed his Oberland battalion at Peace Corner. The discipline exercised by the respective leaders of both sides prevented clashes. A bloodbath was avoided by the circumspection and skill of 2 men in front of the Upper Bavarian government building. Captain Schweinle of the Bavarian State Police had taken over the security of the building with his weak detachment. Lieutenant Rosbach had arrived with the infantry school personnel to occupy the building. Machine guns and artillery were in place. Neither officer was clear about events and both had orders to occupy the building. Only one officer of the state police deemed to know the true state of affairs and was urging the use of arms. Despite the perceived threat from a much stronger force, Captain Schweinle kept his head and nerve, and it will remain lastingly to his credit and that of Lieutenant Rosbach. Such is the way, isn't it? Such is the way. Okay, sorry about that, folks. That's just something private that I'm not going to mention, but I had a stirring in myself. I said, I feel like he had let it go. I'm not going to bring it up. Don't worry. Keep it to myself. Captain Schweinle of the Bavarian State Police had taken over security of the building with his weak detachment. Machine guns and artillery were in place. Neither officer was clear about events, and both had orders to occupy the building. Only one officer of the state police seemed to know the true state of affairs and was urging the use of arms. Despite the perceived threat from a much stronger force, Captain Schweinle kept his head and nerve, and it will remain lastingly to his credit and that of Lieutenant Rosbach that the two groups refrained from firing at each other. At the individual command centers and troop assembly points, events unfolded during the night and morning in the following manner. Following the report of the coup declared at the Bergenbrau Keller, General von Kress and Rieth, Lieutenant Colonel retired von Kress and Major von Lieb went to the offices of the military commander of the city. In consultation with the state police under Major von Imhoff, General von Dahmer raised the alarm and ordered the occupation of various locations without actually knowing the situation. General von Kress, who had been appointed von Lossau's successor by Gessler and Siecht after Lossau was dismissed, probably had a special job to perform. Indeed, as he did not receive orders separately from the liaison officer, Captain von Hanneken. General von Dahmer placed himself at the disposal of General von Kress and called for a counter-coup. His conduct and dexterity remind me constantly of Octavio Picciolini in Schiller's Wallenstein. To Prince Picciolini, these words end the last act of the drama. To Lieutenant Colonel von Dahmer, ends of the unholy act in which Dahmer set the troops against the Volkisch uprising at Gessler's behest. When General von Lossow met the assembly at the city headquarters, he was given the choice either of obeying Dahmer and taking charge of the counter-coup or being prisoner of his generals. The responsibility for using the Reichswehr now passed to him. Lossow decided to recognize Dahmer's order. When accompanied by Captain Seidel that night, if I had made a forcible entry into the museum instead of allowing myself to be turned away by the sentry, I would probably have understood in time what events were transpiring, and I could have avoided the disastrous consequences. At this hour, Carr and Seisser were still at heart and the soul for the coup. They would probably both have preferred to see the whole event limited to Bavaria, but were definitely not thinking of defecting before they met in the Upper Bavarian government building at around 0100. Matt and Pittinger may have got Carr wobbling, perhaps even before he had his conversation with Punner, which the latter related to us in the morning when he visited District Command at our invitation. Seisser had told his wife of his appointment as Reich Police Minister, and thus had received no orders against the Kampfbund by 0100. The change in their attitude cannot have come at about before this time. Oof, sorry, that was a badly written sentence in my view, but yeah. Whether they were dissuaded at the infantry barracks, I cannot say, but I believe so. I shall leave the coincidences and reasoning there. The web of lies is too thick and entangled to be worth the effort to unravel it. I am only surprised at the extent of the line prosecuting attorney Holl stated in his address at the major trial. Even in the courtroom, little light could be thrown on the sorry affair. The People's Court ought to have made it the basis for its inquiries, but here again a mysterious curtain dropped to hide the political stage, and the judges did not have the strength to lift it. Police HQ was not aware of any situation towards 0200 that morning. When the officer whose duty was to occupy the Upper Bavarian government building inquired, Police HQ told him, by order of the Foreign Minister Punner, the building occupied by the state police remains occupied by the same. The remark about Punner shows that the coup was still valid at 0200. At the Prinz Arnulf barracks, news of the Volkisch coup was greeted with acclaim by officers and men of the state police. A few officers, personal friends of mine, were aggrieved that I had not informed them. Rightly so, for I had promised to update them at the opportune moment, but had been surprised myself by the way things went, and was unable to fulfill my pledge. Colonel von Seisser accepted the congratulations of his officers and never gave any hint that he had rejected the coup. In the early hours, the Bavarian state police were at the disposal of the coup government. Things did not change until 0700 when the order came. Okay. All right, we're going to stop it here pretty soon. Okay, here we go. Things did not change until 0700 when the order came to arrest General Ludendorff. Officers and men did not take this change of front quietly. There was much upset in some police units, and many officers made a binding declaration not to shoot under any circumstances. The same promise had been made by Cavalry Captain Schraut, who died in a soldier's death in the ranks of the state police at the Feldherrnhalle. Even at the Reichswehr barracks, the reversal did not go off smoothly. Officers and men opposed it regardless of the consequences for their careers and reputations. During the night, command of the Bavarian Division returned to General Seat. After his arrival at the infantry barracks, General von Lossow was at first distraught. What was going through his mind, I can only guess. Today, 5 years later, it remains my point of view, just as it was on 9 November 1923, that his conduct that night was unforgivable and reprehensible. I had not been his subordinate for so long and held him in high esteem, and therefore I cannot hate or despise him. In the conflict of duty, a man often fails at the major crossroads of life. Responsibility and duty tower too high. A faulty step, and cruel fate rolls and takes its toll without the weak human being able to halt it. That is how I see the tragic role of General von Lossow. However, I think I ought to add that he wanted to have me court-martialed and shot by a firing squad for my part in the events on 9 November. Berlin let him remain at his post for a few months more, but he was a spent force, and his military career ended in 1924. It was in the early hours of 9 November that General von Lossow began to act. General von Donner and a number of general staff officers were also involved. He refused all negotiations, and all attempts to mediate between the Kampfbund and Reichswehr were waved away brusquely. Major Siri, who had been sent to negotiate, was arrested and maltreated. Reichswehr officers such as Colonel Leopold, who had come to offer their services as negotiators, were detained. The conduct of the officer commanding 2nd Company, 19th Infantry Regiment before, during, and after the action against the district command is a chapter in itself. To the credit of 7th Bavarian Division, it must be said that no complaint can be made against it. The officer in question, known as a hothead in the war, revealed the appalling inadequacy of his character. The situation on 9 November was such that it required everybody involved on either side an unusual degree of self-control. From an officer, especially one who would have expected a clenched jaw, iron calm, and scrupulous tact, Lieutenant Braun preferred to give his inner feelings free rein. What he felt and thought was etched in his features, and this picture of uncontrolled hatred of the Kampfbund occupying force immediately filtered through to his subordinates. As is so often the result in such cases, a lot of what he is alleged to have said and done before and during the surrender of weaponry in the War Ministry courtyard appears to be imaginary, but all witnesses coincide in their opinions of Lieutenant Braun during those events as a man who failed an important role as commander. The theatrical strutting with carbine slung around his neck, the supercilious facial expression of the victor, and his handling of opposing soldiers as criminal were observed by all. To recapture the War Ministry, one could hardly have put a less suitable officer in charge of the operation, and there are plenty of officers of the 19th who volunteered zealously for the appointment. It was a mere coincidence that Braun had been entrusted a short while before with the command of the company, but it meant that his body of men was installed in a crucial spot. When the extraordinary situation developed, the company was not up to the task and brought with it the seeds of the tragic event. Braun was the only Reichswehr officer to attract censure at the disarming proceedings. His senior ensign, earlier an RKF member, would not support him. When Braun received the order to march to the district command, the ensign said before 4 witnesses, "What? They want to put down a car? They want to put down car? I will shoot them like dogs with a grin on my face." I have not quoted this remark here to demonstrate the state of mind of the officer cadet, but to show the scarcely understandable venom which had been injected into a large contingent of the 2nd Battalion, 19th Infantry Regiment on 9 November, traceable to false information and incitement. The intention was not to proceed against Carr, but with him against the government and Reichswehr, Additionally, a Reichswehr officer had a declaration signed by General Ludendorff, which had been passed to General von Lossow personally, that the Kampfbund would not attack the Reichswehr barracks. The same deception was practiced on troops arriving in Munich and from outside the region who had left to pay homage to the coup government and led the real reason for their presence there just prior to being ordered to their positions. To give the devil his due, I will concede that the bitterness of the Reichswehr at the pioneer barracks against the Kampfbund brigades was understandable and not justified, being based as it was on an untrue allegation that they were intending to take the barracks by force. There is no purpose in preserving for posterity the name of the salaried employee who won for himself in an unenviable notoriety by laying hand on the greatest German warlord of the World War. To the personalities I must add mention here of others who, like Epp, Flügel, Horoff, and Hoffmann, not of our ranks, merit veneration for their upright and dignified conduct, not only on 9 November, but also later before the courts. Colonel Leopold of the Infantry School, an exemplary soldierly character who was straight, independent, and a stronger to all compromise and attitude and opinion. Similarly, Major Hasselmeyer was a patriot and honest soldier who would have won the approval of Frederick the Great. Last but not least was a young officer of stainless character, Lieutenant Rossmann, who would never have struck with lies and crafty dodges. Early on the afternoon of 9 November 1923, the Volkisch uprising in Munich was put down in front of the Wittelsbach residence, from where 5 years previously the gangs of howling criminals had forced out the old king. 13 German heroes paid with their lives to extirpate the shame of that day. Their names will be recalled later out of gratitude and reverence. The location will remain dedicated for all time. Today, the Free State and its national government will not tolerate wreaths being laid there on Remembrance Day for the fallen of 9 November. In 1926, Munich police tore down and crushed underfoot garlands left by Rossbach family members. Even if they had not favored the uprising, a Baron von Stein or Bismarck would not have opened fire on 9 November, but turned the enthusiasm of the hordes for their own purposes. The 1923 state opened fire on them. That state, whose hour of birth was 7 November 1918, it was not only a crime, but worse, stupidity. Cavalry Captain Schraut of the state police, in the noble execution of his duty, running between the lines to prevent fighting and a bloodbath at the Feldern Hall, was fired upon by his own side and fell. History will say of him and his comrades who fell in the line of duty that say these also died to liberate the fatherland. The leaders of the liberation movement who marched at the head of the procession and who were not dead or lying wounded in their own blood gathered together with General Ludendorff in the guard room of the royal residence after the incident. The supposed saviors of the fatherland, the interpretation of this phrase, being as they conceived it, shrank back from the final sacrilege of their action of throwing the real savior of the fatherland, as the enemy chief of staff, General Boit, called him into jail. Ludendorff was released and allowed to proceed to his home on Prinz Ludwig Hoch. But the state put a network of spies around it. He was watched. When out walking, all callers were observed. His mail was intercepted and read. Gifts of money meant for the bereaved of the freedom fighters were confiscated, and his phone was tapped by the Reichswehr. Other leading officers of the Kampfbund, including Dr. Weber, Major Streck, and Lieutenant Bruckner, were either held immediately or arrested a few days later. While Lieutenant Colonel Kriebel, Captain Goering, and Lieutenant Rossbach preferred to escape persecution by crossing the border into Austria, the Oberland and National Socialist units, deprived of their leaders, withdrew to join the Kampfbund forces holding the Isar bridges. From there, they retired to the Munich woods. Other groups, despairing of government and people, disgusted and embittered, tossed their weapons away and either went home or let themselves be captured without a fight. At the War Ministry, after I left, the RKF surrendered their weapons as ordered. Then they formed into a funeral cortege, laid the body of the comrade Faust on a bier, and escorted it to his parents' house. The crowd paid its respects to the silent RKF procession on its last march through the streets of Munich. As the procession turned into Promenade Platz, everyone noticed the disgraceful way in which various Semitic heads were grinning. Okay, we're going to skip past this. I don't feel like doing that yet. Yeah, we're getting close to the end, Renee. We are getting close. This is November 8th and 9th, 1923. So we're getting close here. We're going to skip past. We're going to skip down here a little bit. Participants told me that together with the disarmament scene at the district command, this incident on Promenade Platz was the most unforgettable of the events engraved in their memory. The cortege arrived at its destination without further incident. Leave was taken of the dead Faust before the house on the Leisenhof. To honor the fallen soldier, the company marched silently past the body of their comrade. Meanwhile, towards 15:30 hours, I arrived at police HQ and placed myself at their disposal. My faithful companions, Captain Seidel and Graf du Moulin, remained with me. They left at my request after the police, who behaved courteously and correctly, suggested it was best if they went. After spending a day alone locked up, I was placed in cell number 39 with Dr. Weber, Major Schreck, and Lieutenant von Prosch to spend 10 and 11 November. The brothers Kolb and Lieutenant Kuhn of Oberland, and on 11 November, Lieutenant Berchtold kept us company. On 12 November, I was taken to Neudeck for the first remand hearing and brought to Stadelheim prison on the 14th. What the heck? Let's see if we can try to finish this. Well, let's see if we can at least get through chapter 16, shall we? You want to try to do that, Renee? We're going to try to get through chapter 16 here and see how far we can get before I get too tired. Okay. Not far from Munich and surrounded by high walls is Stadelheim jail. This place was not unknown to me. At the end of April 1919, when the German volunteers advanced on Munich below their black, white, red flags in order to liberate the Bavarian capital from the Soviet councils, they occupied Stadelheim. Ponner was the prison governor then. He had laughed at the threats of the Reds and opposed them firmly. No red ribbons fluttered from its gables. The Reds had taken as hostages high-ranking personalities of the royal house, senior officers and officials. The front fighters and the Jung Deutschland had opened the gates. Less than 5 years had passed. Now the gates clanged shut behind the fighters for German freedom, behind the irresponsible member of society who had fought and died for Germany for 4.5 years and preserved her from the chaos of the councils, and who now wanted to liberate her from them. How immature and imprudent we were maybe inferred from the fact that we put into Bavarian government positions those very people who now locked us up. Or has Carr forgotten 13 March 1920? Thanks to the concerns of Carr, besides myself, Major Hundlein, Major Streck, and Dr. Weber were given winter quarters in Stadelheim. For some time, Dietrich Eckhart was very seriously ill and complaining of insomnia and a heart condition. Although his morale was unbroken, shared our fate. We officers wore uniforms and decorations. The prison authorities were not happy to see this, but since we were not convicts, they could not prevent it. We had a single cell each day and night. And only at midday did we come together on the exercise yard and exchange sentiments by means of glances and brief words. If somebody seemed depressed, his comrades would try to lift his spirits as best they could. Though various channels we received news from outside. We learned to our satisfaction that the government of the Free State of Bavaria had abandoned the villa of the publisher Lehmann, which they had seized. Minister Wolzhofer had recovered all foreign currency he had salted away there in a bookcase. Cardinal Faulhaber had decided not to leave Munich. We heard the lot which had befallen Hitler, Kriebel, Rosbach, and Goering, and discovered that other colleagues amongst them, Horner, Frick, Seidel, Brickner, and Brickner, were being held at Neudeck, remand prison. Oh my goodness. Okay. You know what? Okay. I think we're gonna call it good there, folks. We're gonna continue this. I think later tonight. I think we'll just put it up so that I can just read this. But I was waiting for some. Well, I don't want to air my dirty laundry too much, but basically, I was waiting for somebody, and they still haven't called me back on here. I thought we were going to meet up, but anyway, so I'll keep it there. Thank you, Renee, for talking a little bit about that. We're gonna see. I was looking through the end of this here, just to let y'all know. And basically, what this is going to cover is basically him going to prison. And I will read it, don't worry. But we're going to talk about the Reichstag Executive a little bit. And this ends, let's see here, about 1925. This ends in 1925. This is basically what the memoirs lead up to. Let's see here. This is talking about the front bond a little bit, the afterword. Yeah. That's about it. This ends in 1925. So this talks a little bit before, so this doesn't get into, because apparently what I was reading here at the beginning is that basically the stuff after 1925 was destroyed. It was confiscated and it was destroyed during the Night of the Long Knives, which is unfortunate, but at the time it's understandable. But yeah, that's about it. I was just kind of reading through this here to see if I can get a good example. But yeah, Rohm's private archive was destroyed in the aftermath of his murder on 1 July 1934. And apart from this autobiography, only a few scattered personal papers remain. The diaries, letters, and memoranda that he drew on in writing this book no longer exist. See, that's too bad. But understandable. Basically, is that when you want to get rid of somebody, you got to get rid of everything. This makes the autobiography even more significant as a source to understand the life and views of this important redacted leader. But yeah, interesting as heck. I do have to say, I thought this was going to be something totally different. I didn't even, I didn't know what this was, but I think it's still interesting as heck in my opinion. But anyway, I think I'll keep it there. So see you later today, hopefully. All right.